You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Lifeline, offering a holistic wellness approach focused on supporting American law enforcement, promoting resilience, safety, and survivability.
On today's episode of Lifeline, we're going back to December 2012, when a 20-year-old resident of Newtown, Connecticut, shot through a glass entryway into the Sandy Hook Elementary School, killing 20 first graders and 6 educators. He never left the final classroom, choosing to take his own life rather than surrender to police. State Police and Newtown Police immediately responded to the school. Today, we will hear from 2 officers who responded to the 911 calls from the school, as well as those involved in the post-critical incident support. We will talk about the significance of such events on a police officer and how peer support programs play a critical role in helping officers come to terms with what has happened. I'm Matthew Garcia, retired lieutenant with the Connecticut State Police, and currently the project manager for the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund's Ambassador Program. And at the time of the Sandy Hook school shooting, I was a sergeant assigned to Troop E in Montville, located in the eastern part of the state of Connecticut. And I'm joined here today.
I'm Sergeant Will Chapman from the Newtown Police Department. I've been there 15 years. I spent my first 7 years on patrol, where I was at the time of Sandy Hook.
I'm Reverend Dr. Paul Krampitz, former infantry officer and police officer, and currently serve as chaplain with the Connecticut State Police, part of the peer support program and on the CISM team.
Matthew Bell, retired Connecticut State Police. At the time of Sandy Hook, I was a patrol trooper working out of the Troop A barracks in Southbury.
Troy Anderson, Executive Director of Officer Safety and Wellness at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund in Washington, D.C. I retired from the Connecticut State Police after 26 years as the Director of Trooper Wellness and Resilience, and at the time of Sandy Hook, I was the state coordinator for the STOPS program, which is state troopers offering peer support.
And I'm Dr. Robin Grant Hall, and I'm a trauma psychologist in private practice in Glastonbury, Connecticut. And at the time, I was brought in, along with my husband, Mark Hall, by Troy. And what I did initially was provide education about the brain and trauma and EMDR therapy. And then as the years progressed up until recent times, I've done EMDR therapy with many Sandy Hook involved troopers.
This episode will cover a brief overview of the initial police response and then focus on the role of peer support and resiliency. So thank you all for being with us today. Will, you were with Newtown.
Yep.
At the time, you were one of our very first responders to the scene. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So I was sitting in the classroom at Newtown PD. I was working on an arrest warrant from a case from the night before. I wasn't supposed to be working day shift. I was supposed to be on 4 to 12s, but I switched to attend a Christmas party later that evening. So the call came over the radio. You know how it is in law enforcement, right? The call comes in. The language that the person who calls uses gets filtered through dispatch, and then by the time it comes out to us, things often sound way more severe than they are, or they sound different from what's actually happening. But something about it when that call came over the radio that sounded like somebody was shooting inside of the building. You just sort of knew. You knew that it was real, that it was serious, that something really bad was going on. So drove to the school as fast as I possibly could, as did anybody else that was working shift that day, and got out of the car. There was still a good bit of gunfire going off. Ran up towards the school. They had addressed a civilian who was running around trying to get access into the school, to check on his kids. Once we made sure that wasn't a threat, we made entry into the school, and that's where we found the scene that was there. As pretty much immediately on our heels was the Connecticut State Police. And, at one point I looked over my shoulder and it was just a sea of, we all wore gray, Newtown and CSP, but just a sea of gray flooding into the building. That's when That's when CSP was showing up on scene.
And Newtown Police is in the geographical area of Troop A, State Police Barracks Troop A. And Trooper Matt Bell responded as well. And that's what you're talking about when you say a sea of gray. And Matt, when did you get there?
I believe it was within the first 15 minutes of the initial call. And, just like Will had said, I was off duty that day, and I had just dropped my kids off to school, and not knowing, but my kids at the time were the same age. They were 6, 5, and 3. And as you guys know, I was in a spare Crown Vic, luxurious. So my plan was to go to the gym that day, and in the luxurious Crown Vic spare that I had, when you turned that car on, the radio didn't come on. You had to physically turn the radio on. And I swear, I turned the car on and something came over me and said, "Don't turn the radio on." In fear of being in trouble and not driving around with my radio on, I turned it on and I heard just chaos on the radio. So I think, unlike Will, maybe you kind of knew initially what was going on. I didn't, but I knew something bad just based on the badge numbers, listening to the sound of their voices, and I knew it was probably relatively close to where I lived. So I started heading that way. Which way I didn't know, but I started heading down toward the highway. And then it was quickly determined that it was a school shooting. And like Will said, I mean, I literally drove the wheels off the car. Drove the car, parked it at the foot of the school, and I didn't drive it home because I blew it up on the way there. So, literally.
There's not a lot of joy in something like this, but as far as dash cam video goes, there's something about the roar of the Crown Vic that you just don't get anymore when you're watching dash cam videos. Yeah.
After the initial tactical response to the school, and once it was relatively secured, the state police had put out notification to our peer support team, and our coordinator Troy Anderson responded directly to the scene at that point. Troy, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, certainly. I was actually off duty that day, and I'll give you a little bit of a background about the state police STOPS program, which is state troopers offering peer support. Talk a little bit more about that certainly in this, but I was off duty that day, and my intent was to go Christmas shopping. And I got the call from headquarters that there was an active shooter in Newtown. In fact, when I heard Sandy Hook Elementary School, I thought that I had no idea where that was. Little did I know that I would never be able to forget where that was now. But it was still an active shooter scene, and I was getting periodic updates on my BlackBerry. So that gives you an idea of what was happening 10 years ago. And I started driving that way from sort of the eastern central, if I was in the Colchester area in Connecticut, and went that way at combat speed. And when I showed up there, when I arrived, the tactical team was still clearing the building. So as I approached the school, I got to the front door, and there was a sergeant walking out who I'd known for quite a while, and who he was on our peer support team, and he walked out, and when I saw him and I saw his condition, the condition of his uniform and this look on his face, I realized without him having to say anything that the magnitude of what was happening inside. And I kind of took him off to the side and trying to make a connection with him. And it was difficult for him to talk, but he just kept saying over and over, "Don't go in there, don't go in there." And, there was sort of an exchange of people coming out. There wasn't as many people going in at that point. They're trying to secure the building. At some point, the tactical team was coming out, sort of giving the all clear. And as I was seeing state police personnel coming out of the building, I was trying to cordon them off to the side, recognizing that they needed to, we needed to be able to keep track of who was there and what their exposures were. And of course, there was some concern about more traumatization, right? Having them involved in different things. So what I was doing was kind of bringing them off to the side and then quickly just engaging into that transition from that tactical or operational piece into recognizing that we needed to respond as a peer support team, as a critical incident stress management team, and all the components that came along with that. So at that point, I reached back out to headquarters. I mobilized a number of folks from our peer support team to sort of help out. Matt Garcia here was one of them. Matt was my logistical coordinator, and I reached out to Matt and told him, kind of what we needed. And part of what we needed was a few peer support people there to provide that support for this group that we had. We needed peer support people to respond to a respite center. So we sent up a mobile respite center at Troop A in Southbury, and also mobilized some clinicians and our chaplaincy program as well, both to respond to the scene and to respond out, because to the respite center, I knew that the respite center would probably be open for a brief period of time, but there was going to be a real prolonged period of time at that scene, and wanted to make sure that the people, not just the investigators, but all the support people and the responders, had the support necessary. And at that point, we had never experienced anything like that in Connecticut. I think we had conducted probably to date 40 or 50 debriefings. Some of them were, we had done debriefings for line of duty deaths. We had done them for murders or multiple fatalities, but nothing could have prepared anybody that day for what they were going to see and experience. And, having never been in a situation where there was a mass casualty disaster to this magnitude, and the fact that it was right before Christmas, and the fact that it was involving young children. And I think that, it was very clear that there was some frustration from a lot of the first responders there that they weren't able to stop this from happening. And it was very clear that while we were working off of the ICISF, the International Critical Incident Stress Management Bible, if you will, written by Dr. Jeffrey Mitchell, we were working off that, but it only goes just so far. So really, one of the things that I hope that is the listeners are listening to this, it's not a matter of if these things are going to happen, right? We see this so often now in the media. This is sort of stealing the headlines. These mass casualty disasters, these human-caused mass casualty disasters, they're going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's when and where. And are you prepared? And part of that, as we look at that, is the pre-incident education. What are we doing for these folks when we're getting them in the academy? What are we doing? What are we doing before the bad scene? What are we doing at that scene? So what are we doing for intervention? And then what are we doing for postvention? And I think that the group that is at this table today, the significance of this is not lost on me. Having first responders from both Newtown Police and the State Police, having the head of our chaplaincy team who was just amazing in being able to sort of help with that spiritual aspect, and having Dr. Robin Grant Hall here, our psychologist, who not only was just so integral and getting our peer support team ready for what they might encounter and preparing them for how to best approach this, but really helping us so much in that follow-up after, and not having a rule book on how to do this, really helping us create things on the fly in order to make sure that we didn't leave anybody behind. And that was really the key. We didn't want anybody to fall through the cracks. And while a lot of this type of help is voluntary, and we know that it's voluntary, a lot of the folks that seem to push back, and I think we see this a lot in law enforcement, a lot of folks that push back are sadly the people that need it most.
To speak to the difference in agency preparedness, right? So you had that STOPS program. In Newtown, we had an EAP that was an outside vendor. It was something we contracted out, and I was the liaison. So I was the EAP liaison. And so I walked out of the front door to the school, and I saw, I think it might have been even another, somebody else from CSP prior to you being on scene. But I remember them saying, hey, anybody from CSP, come over here, and kind of rallying guys up. And I remember thinking, well, oh, that's a really good idea. While Troy's doing taking all those steps that you talked about, all I was equipped to do was just make a phone call and say, I got a voicemail, and said, "Hey, it's Will Chapman from Newtown PD. We've got something really bad, really big going on here. We could probably use some support." And that was it. And the only training that I had to be a peer support person was to just, all I knew to do was walk around and check on people. And that was my only skill set that I could call upon, was for, the days after. We have in our notes, we'll talk more about the harms of like re-traumatizing guys and having them show back up to the crime scene and stuff like that. But in the days after, all I knew to do was go to the crime scene every day and go to the firehouse every day and just kind of walk around and say, "How you doing? Doing okay? You good? Okay." And then on to the next.
And how
place.
terrible is that? That literally, I mean, I don't want to give you credit where credit's not due, but I know it is due. The first one through the door is the one worrying about his guys. Like nobody in your command was like, "Wow, let me step in for Will here and take the lead on this and make sure my guys are okay." Here's the guy who's probably just, pushing down so much emotion and trauma himself and worrying about everyone else like that. And I think that's the whole point of this, is that can't happen anymore.
That's why.
Go ahead.
Well, that's why I think the debriefs are another reason that they're important. Is it was days and days and days that went by. I remember I was down at the firehouse checking on people, and an unmarked car pulled up to me, and it was Luck and Chuck. This guy's in his he's 90 something years old. He's a detective in the state police. But
True story.
Yeah, it was he's a great guy. But it was two major crime detectives and an unmarked. "Are you Chapman?" "Yeah." "We need to get a statement from you." And that was really the first opportunity I had to tell somebody what I did. And so because of that dynamic, we go years. Sometimes I'll mention something from that day, and somebody else that I work with will say, "Oh, I didn't know that happened." And that communication, I think, is key, especially when it comes to commands, because if they don't know, they can't step in and say, "Oh, we should probably get this guy off the road. We should probably," it's on them to be asking those questions and to be very tenacious and trying to figure out where their people were and what they were doing. But as peer support, we have to make sure that we're, in those debriefings, if there's things that we think should, are important to recognize or important ways to group guys so that the stories are being told, so that we know what went on and what they're going through. We have to pay attention to that.
And this falls under the category of we don't know what we don't know.
Right.
So if your agency has never experienced this and you aren't sitting there right now thinking, "Wow, my agency's never experienced this," what would happen if you're in law enforcement and you're listening to this podcast right now? What would happen if it happened in my town today, right now? Are we prepared to respond? And I think we had in the state police a few things where I recognized the same issue that you had. Not that our peer support team wasn't ready, but I had reached out to our external vendor EAP, which coincidentally back then was the same one you used. We actually terminated that relationship based on we had a sergeant who had passed away, unfortunately, off duty. And we were at the hospital. And when an officer dies, in this case, a trooper dies, even if it's off duty, the hospital is full. And the people were very affected, obviously, by this. So I called our EAP. I did the same thing you did and said, I can be present and I can talk to these folks, but it'd be great to have somebody from EAP camp come down. And they responded with discount gym memberships and restaurant coupons. And I knew at that point that we were ill prepared, at least as far as the EAP. And I think that's why I rely on some folks like Dr. Robin Grant Hall, who provide, those community-based resources, right? This is, while you may not be affiliated with our EAP, you are clearly informed about trauma and what we need to do. I'm going to reach out to you. And in this case, and I'm certain that Dr. Hall will talk about that, but that's exactly what I did.
So I want to emphasize a couple of things. So I'm Robin Grant Hall. I'm a trauma psychologist, and I felt incredibly honored to be called. My husband, Mark Hall, who had also worked with the state police, Troy, called us a few days after. And I remember like it was yesterday. He was driving home from Sandy Hook, and he was in his car. I think it was like 10 o'clock at night. And he basically said, I've got about 50 or more traumatized troopers, and I don't even know where to start. Because he just knew, you just saw in people's faces. And I think in any incident like this, anyone who's in law enforcement, if you look into someone's eyes, you're going to see it. Because yeah, you can learn when you learn about trauma, it's left brain, right brain. The trauma's on the right brain. There's no language there. People have that stoned, blank kind of stare, and they can't talk. That's trauma. And it's when the brain is overwhelmed, when something unexpected happens. That's as simple as it is what trauma is. And so there's two things we're emphasizing. One is, I think anyone listening to this should say, if this happened today, is my department ready? And the key with the state police that was highly unusual for 10 years ago is that Troy had set up stops. And it wasn't just, let's get some peer support together. They were highly trained. So I had already been there, and I had trained them about the brain and trauma and things, and other people had trained them. And Troy, how many people? I remember when the first thing I did with my husband is we went into a room with the union and the peer support, and I basically said, here's your brain, this is cop brain, this is what can happen, and this is what a trauma like Sandy Hook does to the brain, and this is why people aren't okay. And so having the brain language is very palatable for law enforcement, and it makes sense. Saying you're emotionally upset or whatever doesn't quite make sense because that's not the cop brain. So even though they look upset, feel upset, it's actually an internal brain injury. So Troy, how many, 30, 40, 50?
Yeah, we had a full house.
No, but how many peer support did you have at the time?
We had 77 at the time, but they weren't all necessarily involved in this, and many of them, while they had been trained in critical incident stress management, they weren't on one of our two critical incident stress management teams. So we had two CISM teams, one from the eastern part of the state, one from the western part of the state. And those are the people that you saw, as well as some of the folks from our union leadership that were very supportive of us during that and following that time, and even some of the members of executive command staff that came in. And so, I mean, that was really, as I look back at that very moment, Robin, when you and Mark, who also, by the way, is a trauma-informed sort of psychologist. I don't want you to think that, he was doing something different, but we'd worked with Mark before. When you guys came to the union, it was really an opportunity for us to look at what that next chapter would be. This was before we started our debriefing process, which was very robust, that schedule that we did. But it was before that, and certainly before we were able to start to formulate what follow-up beyond that might look like. But at least it planted seeds, and I think it really got everybody on the team hyper-focused on what was important, and that really was brain science. And where do we go from here, and how do we address, and how do we take care of ourselves as we go through this? So.
And I think most departments are now doing this, but I think it really helps to bring somebody in from the outside, because everyone inside, everyone's traumatized. The whole department's traumatized. At that point, the whole Connecticut State Police were traumatized. The state was traumatized. That was a very traumatizing event for everyone. So bringing someone in from the outside, which is what Troy did, I could think clear and Mark could think clear, because we weren't state police, we weren't cops, and we weren't even in the agency. And to be honest, we were giving recommendations and advice without the worry of command or our jobs or who's going to be ticked off at us or whatever, which can happen in agencies. And I have to say, one thing I was pushing for that they didn't do, and I think is very hard to do, and I think is still a problem. And I don't know if you've got the union, you've got all these other issues. I think debriefing should be mandated. And I think the chief or the colonel or the command should be able to at least list, these are the people we know, in fact, were first on the scene. And these 20, 30, 40, 50 people have to come to the debriefing. Because I know it's not like funny, but up to literally this year, I'm still seeing troopers who are getting jammed up, in trouble with work or other things, and alcohol and other issues, or are on other scenes and getting traumatized, and they come in and they were some of the front responders for Sandy Hook. The toughest and the best in major crimes and detectives and troopers, some of the toughest of the tough are the ones that never got help. And those wounds are still within them. And Honestly, they should have been mandated to debriefings and mandated to some kind of check-ins, which is another thing that I think is a recommendation. This does not stop the first few months or 6 months after an incident. It goes on for years. So the first anniversary date is huge. And then how are they doing the year after that, and 2 years and 3 years? And tracking over time, I think, is also a crucial change that needs to happen, because I think a lot of times resources are thrown in the beginning and then it's assumed that people are okay and they're really not.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that you were talking about, Robin, is I think about making it mandatory to attend debriefings is that, we had talked about that in the early formation of stops and as we were creating policy and protocol as to how that might look. And I think that the concern was there were a couple things. Part of it was brought out through collective bargaining. Part of it was administration. There were concerns about, what making people go who are essentially hostages, right? I don't want to be here. Are we going to maybe throw the process off? Or what if I'm off duty this day and you're going to make it mandatory? You're going to pay me overtime. And if I get hurt on the way there, is this going to be workers' comp? So these are the kinds of things I completely agree. And the more time that I've spent doing this type of work, the more I recognize the importance of also inviting everybody there. The importance of having them there is the fact that you're really eliminating stigma by making it mandatory. If everybody has to go, then everybody can complain about it and look like they're cool, and nobody will look like they're displaying any form of weakness, right? Oh, they're making us go. We don't want to go, of course. Nobody wants to go. When we all know that that's not true. People are recognizing, and I think Sandy Hook was a perfect example of people recognizing the damage and what they were dealing with, the level of acute stress regardless of what your assignment was there. I think people were really like, I need some assistance. This is more than I can deal with. And we heard that over and over again. But I think if you're putting together a peer support or a critical incident stress management team, those are part of the things that you need to consider. Is this going to be mandatory or is it going to be voluntary? And if you had asked me 10 years ago, I probably would have said, I don't want hostages, let's make it voluntary. I would not agree with that now. My position has completely changed. I think everybody needs to be in the room. And I think that includes command staff. I think that includes dispatchers. I think you have to do, and we did that at Sandy Hook. We had debriefings for all these folks, including family members, spouses, significant others. We did debriefings for them too. So those are the kinds of things you need to think about.
I think it's odd too, in the culture we have in law enforcement, that that officers are so resistant to something like that being mandatory, and that command would be so resistant to something like that being mandatory. Because think about collect research, right? Hey, you need to come sit in a room and listen to this information, even though you already know a lot of it, even though it's going to be frustrating, even though you're going to question the whole time why you're here. You need to come sit and listen to this for a day so that you can keep your job. And nobody says, well, I'm not going to collect this year because it makes me uncomfortable and it's frustrating and I get bored and tired. We go. And so why don't we have the same attitude with something that's for our own mental health? It's all right, you might not want to be here, but this is a part, we're ordering you to be here. We'll pay you. I think it's funny how for things that we don't like and for things that push our comfort zone a little bit, we love to ask that question. Well, what happens if I get into a car accident on my way there? And there's plenty of stuff that we don't find ourselves asking that question for. When the best barbecue place around or whatever it is offering, free dinner, we don't say, well, geez, I'd go, but I don't know. It's, there's a lot of crazy drivers out there. No, we go because it's something good that we want, So I think one of the things we've done well with is shifting the conversation. If we had to pull out some victories of the last 10 years, it's shifting that conversation and normalizing mental health for officers and at a command level, and also from a bottom up level, going a little, we're in a place now generationally where the officers who are in command and the officers who are instructors at the academy level are officers who were rookie cops when this happened. And I think it's key having people really communicate the need for it to the newer officers, but also the folks that are in the position to make key decisions with it, really understanding in their hearts the need for it. I think we're heading in a good direction with that.
So I'm thrilled you brought up research training, because in the last 2 years, I've been part of municipal research training. And again, and you have to do a very simple version, I think, in the academies, but ideally all recruits, and I'm talking about like an hour or two, all recruits would be educated. This is your brain. You've got a special resilient brain. You're a cop. But let me tell you what kind of breakthrough can happen, what a trauma is, what happens, and then what you can do about it. I'm in what's called an EMDR therapist, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I'm not going to push that too much in this podcast. I think
Push it all you want.
I think it's effective.
I
I
agree.
think it works. Cops love it. And I'm going to be honest, in my opinion, it's the only thing that really works for cop incidences, because you reprocess a lot of the sensory pieces. And so jumping forward, in the research and in the academy trainings, for me to go in and for a professional psychologist to say, this is your brain, this is what can happen. So now when your officers experience an incident, all that information is in their head when they weren't traumatized. Because when you go in and try to explain that to traumatized brains, people are so overwhelmed, they literally almost can't take it in because they're still in shock. So if there's a debriefing now and someone's in there going, hey, and all these people understand their brain, they understand what trauma is, they know what happened to them, they know they can get help, they know it works, they have hope of getting better. Now you're 10 steps ahead in terms of a department getting healthier. And so having a psychologist or somebody do the brain training and trauma training in academies and research, I think is another proactive measure that's key
Well,
for
I
the
think
future.
that also opens a door, I think, for where law enforcement seems to be going with this, which is mandatory minimum, sort of once a year, you have to go get checked in, right? You have to go do a mental health check-in with a clinician. And even if you sit and talk about the New York Mets or some policy at your agency you don't like, at least you got a baseline. At least you've gotten rid of the stigma. At least you're in talking. And, I think that's something that I'm starting to see more across.
Okay, except Troy, guess what's happened? And I was worried about this. It's too risky, the check-ins, the yearly check-ins. So my reports from the people I'm seeing in therapy is they're very brief. How you doing? Are you okay? What do you think a cop's going to say? Okay, the full fear is something's gonna happen.
That was one
And
of
they're
the
right. So they're all saying I'm fine.
Right. The fitness for duty concern.
They're all saying I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine, because they want to quote pass it and keep working, and they don't want to risk being taken out of their jobs or being targeted.
that's one of the hurdles when we're putting together the debriefing. So back in 2012, it was voluntary, right? It wasn't mandatory, and the thinking was, and this is coming from talking to a number of officers and troopers, because I would do the invites. I would make the phone calls and let them know we're putting together a debriefing for this particular group. And a lot of times the feedback I would get would be like, no, I'm all set, I'm okay. And really, what you're trying to convey is that I'm not questioning whether or not you're okay, right? There may be somebody in that room who's not. And this is why it's peer driven. It's peer support, because by showing up, you're providing support to somebody else who may not be okay, and they're not going to say anything, right? They're not going to say anything. And when they look around a room and they see others in that room, they know that they have the help. They know that they have somebody that they can reach out to. And then when you contribute to the conversation without even realizing it, there's oftentimes information that's being shared that somebody is pulling in, and they may not verbalize it, they may not say anything, but it's connecting with them. And had you not been there to share that, that never would have gotten out. So it's important when the debriefings were being put together, and I would express this as I made the phone calls, that your presence there can help somebody else. You may be fine. You may be, and I'm not questioning that. What I'm saying is by being there, you could be helping somebody else. And that's important, because some of the debriefings we did were very large. I would say, your ideal max would be about 20. We had a number of logistical things to consider, because some of our responding groups were very, very large, and we try to keep the groups the same. So we don't bring in somebody who showed up on day 2 and was doing traffic control is not going to sit in a debriefing with first responders. Very different experience. And it's not fair to both sides. It's not fair to both groups, because we don't want that one person to be traumatized by hearing what the first responders went through, what you experience and what you're sharing. So it's important to keep those groups very similar. And in doing so, some of our groups did exceed 20. We had to have some large rooms, and the debriefings took quite a while, but we were able to at least pull in the groups and get the information out there. We had some smaller debriefings, which were just as significant. And again, it comes down to being there to support one another, right? Being there to help one another. Paul.
Yeah, I'm the old guy at the table. I was in the military and a police officer in the 80s and 90s. And I'm just reflecting on the tremendous progress we've made since then, because we didn't talk about any of this. It was suck it up, deal with it. And we've come to the point, I think, where most people can say it's okay not to be okay, right? And that was not the case. We didn't talk about this in the military. We didn't talk about it at the academy. And to show any sort of emotion was a sign of weakness. And people would question your ability to do the job. So the very fact that we're talking about this now, and maybe even talking about making it mandatory, I think is tremendous progress. So, now I'm a parish pastor, and I'll just quickly add, how I got involved that day. Friday is my day off. Friday and Saturday is my weekend. And I'd gotten a call that morning from the school in Cromwell where my kids were attending. One of my boys was sick, and could I come pick him up? So I jumped in my car, and I got a second call, and I'm thinking, man, the nurse knows I'm coming. I almost didn't answer the call, but I did. And then, I was told that I was needed at Troop A as soon as I could get there. There'd been a big incident. So I'm trying to, and I could tell by and I forgot who actually called me. I think it was probably Matt. Matt called me, but I could tell from
I think I called you.
Yeah.
I think I called you from Troop A.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I called you, and we saw this play out, is when I got to Troop A, because Troy, that's where you had told me to go, and that was important because having been through the peer support training, we as officers, we want to go right into the fire. We want to go to where everybody is, right. But that's not where you're going to do the most help, right? But we have a tendency to want to flock to that one area, and Troy had said go to Troop A, which was the respite area. And I knew that Matt and others, and Matt, I didn't know you were part of that group initially, right? I didn't, when you came back, that's when I met everybody. But Troy had said, go there because all of the Troop A first responders are going to be going back there, right? And there was, in that mix, there were troopers also who were from various parts of the state who happened to be on other assignments who responded there too. So it wasn't just from Troop A. And when I got there, in the lobby, there were all of these people that had shown up to help. We had no idea who they were. I didn't recognize any of them. I'd never seen them in a training. I didn't know what they brought to the table. I didn't know what their background was. I think that's when I picked up the phone and I called you, because we had been through the training only 2 years earlier.
Right.
And then we also knew each other from a past life. So I knew I could rely on you. I knew I could work with you. And so that's when I picked up the phone and said, get up here. And I can't even tell you who was in that lobby that day, but they were just coming to help. And the problem is that has to be a coordinated effort. Right. It can't just be people showing up and help. There really has to be some coordination with that. So I reached out and I gave you a call because I knew we were all on the same page and we were going to work together.
So I knew I needed to be there. I also knew I had to get my sick son out of school. So I throw him in the car. My wife is a school psychologist in Waterbury, which was going to be on the way. So I said, hon, I'm dropping Zayden off, and you're going to need to take him home. I don't know when I'll see you next. I'm going to be busy. So showed up at Troop A, and I saw this sea of people that I also didn't know. I recognized a few, and I mean everybody I think is well intended, but it does have to be a coordinated effort. And then I saw, you guys rolling in, and that stare, that if you've seen it in military or law enforcement, exactly.
Bone chilling, right? It's bone chilling.
I saw it, and okay, so
not
I know
good.
what we're dealing with.
It's not good.
So I spent some time there at the respite center, and then someone brought me out to the school, and I hooked up with Troy. We rode together, and it's crazy the things you remember. I remember that I hadn't brought a coat, and it was a pretty cold day.
It was a cold night.
Troy gave me his coat to keep warm.
Oh, that's nice.
So it's funny that you mentioned when you arrived at Troop A, and Matt, you alluded to it too, that there was a sea of people, and then you talk about like the look on our face, and I guess this goes to that autopilot. I don't remember anybody being at Troop A at all until I was downstairs with my crew. I didn't see anybody, and unless I was directly talking to you, Matt, or you, Troy, I'm realizing it now as we're talking about it, and you guys are like, there was a sea of people at Troop A, and I'm like, where? Troop A is not that big. Where were they? Because I walked through there and I didn't see them.
Okay,
and
but I think you answered your question when you
Right,
when people are traumatized. Do they make eye contact?
No.
Because if you make eye contact, you feel.
Right.
So if you look at me and you make eye contact, you're going to start feeling. And everyone's trying to stay away from the trauma brain, which is the right side of the emotions. So you get not only the blank stare, but everybody looking like off into space and not really knowing where to look, but looking down.
Right.
And I think, so I want to make a comment about the helpers, because I think this is something that isn't talked about a lot with these incidences. I heard all these stories with Connecticut State Police, the Newtown Police, people come out in droves to help. And then it creates a whole nother problem and stress for the police and for the town. You know, and yes, was it nice that everyone sent stuffed animals to Newtown? But when you have truckloads of stuffed animals, what do you do with it? When it's a month later and the Newtown police are trying to recover and get back to work, and, you know, grandma shows up in the lobby with the 3-year-olds with a pretty little picture of, I'm so sorry you were hurt. I heard you had a boo-boo. That doesn't help you work as a cop that day. And so that's a big problem, is the helpers that show up with
So we
great
talked
intention.
about this
but
before,
create
right?
big problems.
I know at some point at Troop A, you know, we were getting probably not as much as you guys were in Newtown, but we were still getting our fair share. And every day walking into the troop was just another trauma day, I guess, is you know,
like a trigger.
there's just
You get
triggers,
triggers.
what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And at some point I went to the lieutenant and I said, we have to stop putting everything in our roll call room. Like, we can't stop the people from giving it to us, but we have to stop showing it to us, because it just got so overwhelming. And like you said, you get ready for work and you're like, all right, better today. And then you get to the troop and then all of a sudden, boom,
You get So let me also name something that I think I felt so honored to be able to help out the state police naming this, because it was a brain thing. I think Sandy Hook was so overwhelming and over the top, even for shootings, because of the age of the children. And what I explained to everyone is that when you see little children, little cutie pies, and that's around up to the age of 6 or 7. I mean, I'm not trying to say horrible, but older children would not have, in fact, impacted the law enforcement as much. So when you see little kids, you see animals, oxytocin involuntarily pumps into your brain. So no matter how tough you are, military, cop, SWAT, it's still you're human and you have a brain. So oxytocin betrayed law enforcement that day, because oxytocin pumps in. It's the bonding attachment chemical that's awe, AWE. So when you see stuff on the internet, like little puppies and kids, and you smile and go, aw, and you have this feeling in your chest, totally involuntary. Well, guess what happened when people walked into that school? They had this horrific, absolutely horrific crime scene. And then they had little backpacks and little notes to Santa and cute little things and cute little kids. It really did major, major internal brain damage. And that's why people were so traumatized and so easily triggered. To this day, I think a lot of my Sandy Hook troopers can't look at little backpacks to this day without getting triggered. Am I right?
Oh yeah, it's tough.
Okay.
I mean, even I apologize if I'm going off track here, but I'll back up and say thank you for the work for what you call the brain language and bringing that to cops. We're very black and white, and when people get too clinical, I'll say, on us or
psychobabble,
right? We kind of shut it off,
right?
But when you bring it to this is your brain on trauma. We understand that.
Yep.
And I think that was the big thing with EMDR, and Troy and Matt introduced me to that down at a seminar in Georgia we were at. And what I try to tell troopers or officers that I'm helping in a situation is like, it's voodoo, but it works. Like, don't try to understand it. And I try to like lay it out in just kind of layman's terms to them of how it works. But if they don't, like, if we don't understand things, we shut off to them. So I think the more that we can bring EMDR and the brain language to cops as just plain English, the more accepted it'll be.
Also, I think the what's so amazing about explaining the brain, and by the way, this is kind of an off comment, but Troy also did something very unusual, I'm going to assume. I don't know what happens in other states with an incident is, and I call it dragged, but I was like, I love doing it. He had Mark and it was like he became our manager, he started setting up all these talks. So he had us immediately, I think a month later, we walked in and gave a whole brain talk to the top 40 command of the state police. And Troy was like, no, these people need to understand this too. They need to understand what happened to them and what happened to everyone else. And then he took us to the governor's office. So we explained to the governor of Connecticut and all the commissioners, because Troy didn't mention this, but he also went to DCF and some other agencies because they were involved. And then we went into going down to the FBI, and somehow I even ended up in the Secret Service in New York eventually because they were all involved, even out of state, and like the FBI in Connecticut, and they didn't have their people and they were isolated. But when first responders are said, this is your brain, all a trauma is the brain experiences something unexpected and overwhelming. It's that simple. So if you go to a horrendous event and you do okay, you're not a monster. It means your brain was kind of wired in already for whatever you saw. And somebody else could go to a relatively minor incident and get pretty bad PTSD because something there was unexpected and overwhelming. And their brain really was not used to it. And I'm not going to go in the details. It's too traumatic. But the visuals of the Sandy Hook school and the scene were so bizarre and overwhelming and just strange that the crime scene itself was just a highly traumatic scene for that reason. It wasn't, quote, just a horrific murder scene of all these kids. It was what they look like, classrooms. And Christmas time, when you learn about the brain, everybody's brain is in a different place in the holidays. Listen, most of you guys weren't even at work. Everybody was off. Troy was Christmas shopping. Whatever is when there's Christmas shopping going on, and people weren't mentioning this, but this was also an unusual incident because the firehouse was nearby. All the families were there for hours with the governor, which was a whole nother traumatic scene. But the firehouse is like this friendly, happy place at Christmas, selling wreaths, and there's lights about and everything. So having the brain traumatized and all this happy Christmas stuff was stressful and kind of messed people up. They're supposed to be like buying Christmas gifts and preparing for Christmas. Nobody could give a darn about Christmas at that point, right? Which also stressed people out, especially with young kids. So anybody who had young kids because the oxytocin at home or grandkids or whatever, they couldn't even look at them hardly.
You know, I just want to build on this triggers and the uniqueness of the situation with the age of the victims and the time of year. I had just started being the pastor of this congregation a month earlier. I'd been in Bristol for several years before that. And, I got through the night. I think I got home about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I felt like, I was doing okay. So the next morning, Saturday, was the rehearsal for our Christmas pageant, which should have been a joyful thing. It's my first year as pastor there. It's a big production. We had 40 kids. So, I walk over into the church and I start to see these kids that same age and all the Christmas stuff. And I said to our Sunday school director, I can't be here because it was just too much. So what normally would have been a really happy kind of thing was just crushing.
Okay, so Paul, think oxytocin. Yeah. I love Christmas pageants with the kids. Everyone sits in church, these cutie pies in their little costumes. They're so excited, and they're walking down and they're singing or playing their roles. And what you don't realize, and now you'll understand, oxytocin's pumping like crazy. You're in this awe state of cutie, 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 and it makes everyone feel good. Your brain, there's no way it could go there. And as soon as it started going there, bang, you're back to Sandy Hook, and you just get flooded.
Yeah, I experienced that in a real kind of a visceral way, and I just went home. And
good for you.
Kind of checked out for several hours.
Which, by the way, an offside, just advice-wise, is what Paul did was incredible, because most people would have been like, I'm a pastor, I can't leave. It's like Christmas. What are people going to think? If you push through a PTSD trigger, you actually do like internal brain damage. So whatever, if Paul, I don't know if Paul got PTSD or not, or what happened, but if he had already any PTSD going on, and if he had pushed through and stayed, he now would have been twice as like injured. He would have done damage to himself. It's like trying to run on a bad knee.
I'm very fortunate to be in a congregation that supports all the kind of outside stuff, I'll say, that I do with the state police and local departments. And even though I was a brand new pastor to them, they gave me the space to do that, and also understood that I wasn't okay. And, so I had a supply pastor come in and help out a little bit. And, but as we come on the 10th anniversary of that, it does bring it back again. We don't do a pageant anymore. We have a living nativity with sheep and goats outside. So it's different, but it's still, the memory will always be there for sure.
I think that was a good lesson learned for me, is that, pushing through it is damaging, and it's akin to, running a marathon on a sprained ankle. Like we can get there, we can drive ourselves through it, but the ankle's never going to repair properly. Whereas if we had just rested it, it would have.
And you may never run again.
Yeah.
And the analogy is, we lost some great, great troopers from Sandy Hook who weren't able to get the right help, or couldn't get the right help, or used alcohol instead. And tragically, they went down eventually, and they got themselves in trouble. And it's just very sad, because everybody knew what caused the injury. But as law enforcement, now you're educated. You have to get help if you're injured, or you're going to lose your job, or something's going to happen. If help is offered, you can't keep plugging along and thinking you're going to be okay when you're not. It's not going to happen.
No, I think, and Will, you and I were having a conversation earlier about this. You're very intimately involved with the first response, right? And so there are things that are going through your mind, and even afterwards, you're consumed by so many different things. This speaks to the importance of strong leadership, right? You need to have departments need to have strong leadership, because those leaders need to recognize where help is needed within the department. Because it may not be that you're not wanting to reach out, but you're just so consumed with so many different things going on. You may not even know where to reach out, or you may not even recognize something in yourself. Matt, you as well. And this is where the importance of having strong leaders in place prior to an incident is important, because those are the ones that are going to really help steer the ship, if you will, afterwards. You get people to where they need to be, where they need to go, and make sure that the department as a whole comes back on track. And
I think it's a definitely a piece when you get to the command level, but even at the frontline level, one of the best things we can do is just concede to that pride we have in our agency, and we do it our way, because our way is the best way. And if we can just allow ourselves to acknowledge the expertise of others and work together, it's huge. So when we kind of release a little bit of that pride, and when I'm at this scene and I'm from the Newtown Police, and a sergeant from the state police starts talking to me, oh yeah, I was in the Army. Oh, cool. My dad was in the Army forever. And, we're talking, and you should try this EMDR thing that, we know about. I run the peer support. Here's my card. And just, Troy, obviously looking at me and saying, all right, this kid needs to have my card. And me looking at him and saying, all right, this guy's a trooper, but what he's saying sounds like I should be paying attention to it. And that, if I look at the track that my life took over that next, 30 days or so, but even now into the future, it's, thank goodness I didn't say, well, he wears a different hat, so I'm not going to take his card. I'm going to go with what we have. One of the best things that I could have done is sort of become a student of my own brain. And I think any growth I've had lends itself a lot to that process. I tell my students, we teach a stress management program. It's out of the Benson Henry Institute. Shout out Herbert Benson, because he passed away fairly recently. But it's all about understanding how the brain works and the connection between our brain and our body and stress. And one of the things that I tell my students is there's a reason we take apart our firearms and clean every little piece and put them back together, because when you do that, you develop a heartier respect for the tool, and you can use the tool much more effectively. A kid that can, when I say kid, I mean the academy recruit.
We're getting old, Will.
Yeah. But a recruit that can take his weapon apart and clean it and put it back together is going to shoot better than a recruit that you just handed it to them and they don't have that relationship with it. And it's the same with our brains. We need to know how to take our brains apart and understand how all the parts work and what they do and why they do what they do and what chemicals are coming and going, and put it back together. And if we do that, we're going to be able to use our brain as a much, much more effective tool. And so I think, again, to tie it back to your prompt, when leadership recognizes the value in that, and maybe they even recognize, you know what, I don't understand that, but I understand that it's good. And I'm going to let go of my pride a little bit and acknowledge, like, hey, I don't get this, but I understand the value in it. And so I'm going to bring in people who do, and we're going to make it a priority. I think that's where leadership really needs to play the role. Not every chief or colonel is going to be a former peer support officer, but every chief or colonel has the ability to say what they prioritize and don't prioritize.
And I think after an incident, it has to come from the top down. If the chief and on down are not supporting the debriefings and this kind of idea about planning and what to do and understanding some people are not, quote, going to be okay, and that is okay, and that you can get help and we're going to make it through this together, that you're going to have problems healing from an agency or department. And a comment about the brain is when I give trainings, I'm always pushing police. They have the best uniforms and equipment, and they, eat. Sometimes they're really good eaters and they exercise. You have to take care of your brain. And they're very simple things like deep breathing and doing things during your work to keep the stress hormones down, to keep the brain healthy. And I think police are just catching on. But again, it's like so great. So, your whole body's okay, but you're like, if you get PTSD or your brain goes haywire, you're not going to be able to get through your career. And I think police, and with what's going on now with the increased incidence of violence, there's going to be more and more incidences. And police have to really respect that they have to understand their brain and how to keep it healthy.
Going back to the leadership point that you were talking about, Will, obviously we all know that there's a difference between a leader and a supervisor. And we all want that leader in a command position. And what I think that they need to realize is as you move up the chain, you become the subject matter experts in everything, or you should. And that includes, personnel and what's the latest clinical development, whether it's EMDR. I just heard of something similar to EMDR, but obviously I'm not a leader because I don't know about it and I'm not a subject matter expert on it. But also having buy-in on your personnel and understand that you're responsible for them. So you have to be able to be the one that looks out for your guys and see, and I'm not saying that you're going to be the one that fixes them, but you should be able to recognize, like, hey, Will's having a tough day. Let me have somebody go talk to Will and see, if we can get him help, or if there's something more to it, or he's just having a bad day. But I think that's, I know from just Sandy Hook in particular, there were a lot of failures on our command. And one in particular was, right after I got out of the school, unknowing what was really going on, Troy comes over, and I later find out he's actually hurting me, which is, part of the whole beginning process. But I don't know what's going on. But Troy says, who was in there? I point to some people. He says, all right, do me a favor and just kind of gather around this picnic table over here. So as we're doing that, and we're all just kind of really in just disbelief, I don't know if there's even any conversation going on, but one of our lieutenant colonels walks over to us and asks what we're doing. And I said, I don't know. I don't know what we're doing, but Troy told us to go over here. And he's, in so many words, says, all right, come with me. I need you guys to be family liaisons and make death notifications. And immediately, and I don't know why, I don't think I'm that smart of a person, but I knew that was a suicide mission, that anybody that had been in that school and saw what we saw, to then make it so personal that you were going to be attached to the family and notify them of their child's death was just a horrendous idea. So I said, I'm not doing it. And I pleaded, you can't make these guys do it. I said, you can do whatever you want to me. I'm not doing it. He continued, and I still, it's one of those images that will forever be ingrained in my head, is the 6-7 guys or however many walking behind this lieutenant colonel like lambs being led to the slaughter. And in that moment, I had seen Troy. Troy was doing about 170 different things at that moment. But I ran over to him and I said, Troy, you have to stop this. And he goes, what are you talking about? And I explained to him. And obviously, Troy did his magic. And I think that was probably at the point where you were like, we got to get you guys out of here. And then that's when you told us to go to Troop A. So, but going back to the whole leadership point, that's a lieutenant colonel in the state police, not even recognizing where everyone else recognized that we were ghosts, zombies, traumatized. And he didn't care. He just needed people to do a job. Not even understanding that the person that he's talking to is, in the most traumatized point of their life probably. And he wants, there's the mission, go get it done. Instead of looking at the person and being like, wow, these guys need help. I don't need to send them here. I need to send them with Troy. So
I'm thrilled you brought this up because when you do EMDR, I tell people there's the incident and the after. The incident can be traumatic, but a lot of times it's sensory for cops. It's what they're seeing, hearing, whatever, because they're in high alert. The after is where the emotional trauma can happen. And so ironically, with you bringing up that story, I did EMDR, obviously, on one of the guys standing with you. And except for what he saw in the school and maybe a couple of moments in the school, guess what? That was his next high traumatic moment. When that lieutenant colonel said to him, with you guys, he looked down. I have chills right now, to be honest, because I'm like in his body. He looked down and looked at the blood on his uniform, the blood on his shoes, and looked up and was just, and then you're in a quandary. It's a very militaristic organization, the state police. You're not allowed to say no. You have the guts to say no. So now your brain is going, I'm not allowed to say no. Am I going to get fired, lose my job? But I can't say yes. And look at me. How can I go make a death notification knowing how I feel and have blood on my boots and my uniform? And my guy just froze. And thank God for you, Bill, that you were able to speak and that you went to Troy. But that was one of the most traumatic moments for my guy that we had to work on and process out, was that exact moment. And that trauma, ironically, was put into his brain by a command of his own agency after a traumatic incident. And I've had a lot of incidents like this, is like things that are done or not done that actually traumatize the person afterwards, and more on an emotional part, make them really angry, make them confused because they don't think. And it's really sad.
And I think, go ahead, Will.
I was just going to say it's a key point is when we talk about leadership and critical incidents. If it's not an active incident anymore, if we're past that first guys in, go and stop the threat, if we're past that point, we have all the time in the world to slow things down and make sure that we're asking those questions. The question of, all right, what do we do with that first tier of responders? That question should come so much sooner after, all right, we got the threat, we stopped the threat. That's when you ask that question. Because if you get leadership in that mentality of, all right, what do we do to take care of people, and start, even appoint a separate captain, appoint a separate commander to it. Like, hey, you're going to do incident command, you're going to do responder, care. It's huge. I had a very similar experience, and it's not. I think it's only so much to the discredit of whoever the leader was, and partly about leaders not recognizing a flaw in their. I had a very similar experience with somebody was in charge, and I went up to them looking for something to do. Now, granted, I should say, all right, it's not my, I can just relax. I did enough, right? But I give me a job. I need a job. And they handed me a clipboard and said, hey, this is a clipboard. It's got a list of all the staff. I need you to go down to the firehouse, and I need you to round up the teachers and find out who is accounted for and who's not accounted for. Like, that on its own is a job that you could hand somebody, and it's like traumatizing. But I grabbed the clipboard and I went, and I realized two things. It's that, when I got down and I'm standing in the firehouse and looking around and trying to perform this task, I looked around and I realized that there were probably 2 or 3 other people with clipboards, with a list, doing the same job that I was doing. And, I gave myself that same once over, and I'm thinking, I am in absolutely no condition to be seen by parents that are hearing it. And so just the breakdown in communication when you fail to separate those groups of people and address it as just as important of a task as the investigation. When you have a major incident, the investigation is important. Responder care is of equal importance. It should be its own separate thing that you run as aggressively at the same time. If we can, the more we start to get into that mentality of, all right, how do we take care of people, the better off we'll be, and not re-traumatizing people like that.
So again, what Will, you're saying is, at a traumatic incident, again, this has to be worked out departments ahead of time. There should be like someone who's obviously the chief or whoever coordinating, and then there should be like 4, 5, 6 coordinators. And something like that is the first people in that's where their job should stop. They shouldn't be then kept on scene or told to do anything.
Yeah, the only way for it to be successful is to have a plug and play plan in place and have that be part of the process that you automatically start.
So in addition to that, understanding, and I think we're still on the leadership topic, understanding like someone has to take control of the scene. Matt alluded to it before, or Troy, I can't remember. As cops, we all want to flow to the incident, to help out. But sometimes you're better suited somewhere else. And I think that's what you were saying, Matt. Troy sent you to A, and it was like, oh, well, I'll go to A, but there's a job there. What happened at Sandy Hook is nobody took, myself included, until later, but nobody said, like, we have enough people in the school. Like, stop. We need to stop, because everybody that, I would say, to the point that in their mind they were going to Sandy Hook. They could have been in New London. There's a trauma there while I was going, or whatever. So at some point we need to stop traumatizing the people that don't need to be so traumatized. Because like at some point, and I know we probably said it while we were in the school, like people just keep coming in. Like there's just more cops. And
it's a one part you're saying is someone being like a good parent, which is protecting people, saying no one else in that school.
Right.
So let me tell you the problem with these incidences. It's internal brain injury. Cops usually aren't injured physically. Think about that scene with all of you standing in the parking lot. If it was physical injuries, if what happened in your brains was physical and you guys were bleeding and your arm was dangling and your leg was cut up, he would have never said, I want you to go do death notifications. This is the problem. And so what command and other people need to know after a scene that's like this, clearly traumatic, that yes, everybody's injured. So here's the injured people. They were first on the scene. They're done for the day. They just need support, and I need to protect them. I need to give them support, get them off the scene, and we need to protect other people. Do not go look at that.
Right.
And you don't need to see that and be in there. And then also realize, I mean, it's kind of funny. The state police had like 1,000 or more troopers, and the first 10 people or 8 people that go in are supposed to now go do death notifications. What about the other 1,000 troopers? Okay, right. Again, but everyone gets so caught up in the trauma they can't think straight.
But I guess where I'm saying from the whatever department may be listening to this or member of a department, is you have to have that plan in place and be that one. And I think it takes more courage or honor or whatever to be the one that says, you know what, we have enough in. I'm going to be the guy that stays out and keeps the rest of the people out. And that job is just as important sometimes as shitty as it is. And because you want to be in there with your guys and you want to be, you know, in the trenches with them and fighting with them, and to not victimize or traumatize other people. There's something to be said there. And relay a story that there was 2 or 3 of my friends that, as I'm walking out, they do the typical, you know, police, like, I'm kind of making my way because I'm nosy and I want to kind of see, and they're looking in the windows, and I grab them and I go, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, you know, whatever. I was just trying to see. And I go, no. I go, get away from the building. Just get away. And years later, one of them in particular was like, you know, I'm really pissed off at you that you didn't let me go in. And I said, okay. And he goes, but I'm so happy that you.
Wow.
And he said, you know, my mind slips on what you guys dealt with inside. He goes, but I don't have to deal with what you dealt with inside. So, you know, take honor in that, you know, keep as little people traumatized as need be, and sometimes be the one that just says, you know what, and we've had troopers say it, like, you know, we're the best at busting each other's balls. A couple of troopers were like, yep, dude, I didn't go in that building because I knew I couldn't. But they had other roles there, and they took those roles and they did tremendous jobs. And sometimes that's better, you know, and understanding.
I think part of that is just kind of changing your mindset. You know, when you're a rookie cop and you hear that there's a fatal accident 2 states away, you know, you want to be the first one there. Just it's that curiosity factor. What's it look like? What's it feel like? What's the experience like? And I think it's natural. I think we're curious and we want to help. But in a case like Sandy Hook, there was one thing in particular, and it was not long after I had sort of ushered you and your team over to Troop A, that there was, you know, high executive command staff level people that had sort of gotten together and decided that there was going to be an organized walkthrough, which is, it sounded ridiculous to me then as it does now. And it seemed illogical, but I don't think that they were taking into account that traumatization of like, I like, this is self-imposed. I don't need to be in there. We are probably 3 or 4 hours after the operational piece as far as like the response. We don't need to go in. And so I was standing at the door and, you know, kind of strategizing as to what we were going to do with our support people and trying to make sure that there was food and water. And I see this group come walking up, and I said, hey, you know, don't go in there. No reason to go in. And, you know, of course, I was dismissed. I was cast aside because, you know, they had their own plan. And unfortunately, that happened a couple different times on that day. And it was disturbing to think that, you know, a leader would knowingly expose people who work for that person to that type of environment. And not coincidentally, it was that same individual who was the mastermind behind the tour. It was that same individual who eventually ended up reaching out for help himself and recognizing that he was, you know, in fact, collateral damage and walking wounded psychologically. So, you know, I just, those are the lessons learned. There's a ton of lessons learned. The ton of lessons learned were, I think about it from my perspective. We were prepared, weren't we? That's a question. We had a peer support program, a viable, evidence-based peer support program for 5 years prior to this, with 2 teams and highly trained. And not only that, my CISM teams, I would make them do mock training on bizarre things like this. You're never prepared. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing something today.
Yeah, I don't think we're ever prepared for it. In the words of being perfect or being so prepared that it doesn't happen. But I can tell you, and I'm not trying to blow smoke, and you guys know this, without what you established prior to, I don't even want to think about where we would be today 10 years later, because that was the big fear when it happened and things started settling down. It was how many more deaths as a result of the initial shooting, police suicides or and we had our issues of people fall into the drink or domestics and that kind of thing. But I think without what you had in place, it would have been 100-fold, but here we are 10 years later, and there is some guys that are still struggling, but that's because they didn't drink the water they were led to.
What is going to be the collateral damage going out from here at 1 year, at 2 years, at 5 years,
Right.
and how do we try to alleviate as much of that as possible? Right. So we can offer the support services, we can offer the information. Those affected have to be willing to take it. You know that firsthand because you were very much a part of some of those things that were put into place. But that was recognized right off the bat that if there was nothing done, if it wasn't addressed, or the focus was in putting things in place to help keep, officers and troopers from hurting themselves, from harming themselves, or just ending their career in such a bad place that they're not able to enjoy that second chapter of their lives, right? They're not able to retire and go on and lead a fulfilling life afterwards. Recognizing that, I think that helped direct some of the things that were being put into place. And also, that was important when we were doing all those debriefings, and it was a lot for a period of time. But that was one of the motivators, right? That we have to kind of push through this right now because we want to make sure that we provide everything that we know we can to at least get things moving in the right direction.
So, Matt, what you were talking about, though, that is still an ongoing problem with police. And I think more than firefighters, even military and whatever, is that kind of I think I heard the word hubris once, which is this overconfidence and whatever of I'm the helper, I protect people, I don't need help. To this day, I have cops and troopers who go into someone's face that's a friend of theirs after an incident and say, I know you're not okay. This is what works. I did it. I went after this, so that they now know that their best buddy did it. And they even can say, and go see Robin because I trust her, because trust is a huge issue. Okay, because the honesty is a cop cannot walk in the typical therapist who goes, Matt, how are you feeling today? And why are you here? You guys get super anxious and it's just so triggering. You need people who understand your culture. But even with that, they still don't come. Because it's still of like, no, I don't need help. No, I can get through this. It's like this pride in trying to prove you're strong and can get through something. And I don't know what to do about that. All the education in the world, people pushing, it's almost like what I tell people is your best strength in terms of resiliency and personality before trauma, and this is with anybody, becomes your greatest weakness after a trauma. Because if you stick to that, you're not going to get help. You're not going to see your vulnerability and whatever. And that takes people down, and they have to change and adapt or they're not going to get help.
That word hubris, a Greek word, actually, in literature, it's the fatal character flaw. But for first responders, pride is so important. Pride in the agency, pride in the training and the skills that one has done, pride in oneself. But it can become, when it becomes exaggerated to the point where you have so much hubris that you don't need anyone else or anything else, then it can literally become the fatal flaw. And just having the humility, which is something first responders, we don't, I was never taught to be humble, but having the humility to recognize that I need some sort of support, some sort of help beyond what I can do for myself is critical. So I'm really glad you said that word hubris.
It's a great word, isn't it?
It's a great
It came
word.
up on my word for the day once,
you?
and I was like, this is it. This is the word I've been looking for. And again, if after this incident, like Matt, you came out of the school and your arm was dangling, not only would you recognize that, you'd go to an orthopedic surgeon, you'd have surgery, everyone would probably tease you about it, and you guys, it would become like all okay. There's no shame, there's no humiliation having your arm hurt. The problem is it's when your brain's not okay, people are embarrassed and they think they're crazy or something and they try to deny it.
Right. And I think to your point that like some people just aren't going to open up to the help that's given to them.
Right.
But that's why we're here. And anybody listening, you know, it's like being a cop. Sometimes you just can't save everybody. Sometimes their number was punched before, you know, you got there, or, you know, however you want to look at that. But some people are going to be so resistant to the help or just not get it at all. We saw it and they're still struggling. But as peer support or from a wellness program, we still have to be there and at least provide them when they are ready. So a note I took just before that I wanted to mention, like after Sandy Hook and seeing what Troy's program and Matt's help, the wellness peer support, how much it helped me, my immediate response was, I want in. I want on that team. And I did. And I got the training and I became peer support. One of the hardest things that I found in the beginning was, okay, if Matt calls me to do this debriefing or whatever we're going to do, what are my tools to like make this person better? Like what do I do? That's the whole dynamics of what do I do to make him better? And really, it's just being there. There is no tool, so to speak. I know there are tools, but that's the thing. It's just sometimes, like I said, we can't make them drink the water we brought them to, but we can just be there with them.
But guess what your greatest tool is?
And that's what I'm
No, you.
Right.
You're the
Your
greatest
presence.
tool.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, which is you saying, been there, done that. I know what's going on with you. And so look, guess what I've learned? I did PTSD with like non-first responders therapy before this and changed my career. Now I'm with all first responders primarily. And I was surprised by this. I was a little intimidated by all of you guys. And what I found is I kind of forgot. And if you think brain-wise, you're in agencies where you're told what to do and you listen. So more than all my other clients, if I like am super direct and say, Matt, you're not, I say, don't go nutty on me. Don't go stupid on me. Okay. I'm teaching you about the brain. This is what you're doing. This is what I want you to do or not do. Guess what? You guys listen to me way more than my other clients. And so what you can do is looking at someone in their face and another cop and saying, I've been through this. I know the look in your eyes. You're not okay. And you need to get help. And either you get help or your life's going to go down the tubes. I'm going to tell you right now. You'll get divorced. You're going to screw up your career. You're going to end up on the internet for the rest of your life, which, by the way, that's an offshoot of this. You, quote, get jammed up as a cop, whether you do something wrong or not, and partly because of your PTSD, you are on the internet forever. I've had guys sit in my office crying, saying, my kids, my wife, every time my daughter looks on the internet or someone knows her, it's even though this is going to pop up about me and I'm going to have to live with this the rest of my life. And so you looking in the face and saying that to people, that's what's going to get them help. And again, I'm going to be honest. That's the most how I can help people too, is just being super honest and saying, you got to take care of yourself.
Right.
And so that's your greatest gift, is you and your experience.
Yeah. I don't know about me personally.
No. Yes, you personally.
Showing up is the first step, right?
That's it. Right. It's like going to the gym. Right.
And the last step is do no harm. And I think that, the key behind the success of our peer support program and our critical incident stress management folks is they knew what their limitations were. They knew who they were. They knew that being present is something they can do. Maintaining the confidence of what they heard is something that they can do. Being supportive, providing resources and guidance, not necessarily advice, but guidance and a little bit of direction, and following up. And I look at the caliber and the quality of the people that were on our team. And, Matt, I appreciate you giving giving kudos to me and to giving kudos to the program. It was really the men and women of the program that brought the success, because it wasn't, I think in many ways, it wasn't necessarily our response to the Sandy Hook school and being there for so many days and then all the debriefings. I think it was what we had done to establish those relationships with people in the agency for the 5 years leading up to that. That was us being in the academy and talking to new recruits. It was I would sometimes stop in and visit the recruits after hours just to touch base and to show them the human side of what we're trying to do, because knowing one day they may need this type of service. And it was showing up at one of the troops if they're having a breakfast or a Christmas party or some event, and I saw that it was out there. I'm showing up as the stops person. You never miss an opportunity. Number one, to just be present, but to really talk about the efficacy of what we're doing. And I think that was that was a big piece of, people being educated about us and about our presence. So when we showed up at Sandy Hook, they weren't looking at us like, who are you? And our program and the success of our program was not necessarily because it wasn't brought about by Sandy Hook. It was there long before that. And thank goodness that it was.
And Troy, I think follow-up is the key. So without you realizing it after Sandy Hook, if anybody from peer support or you showed up at a Christmas party or an event, you're now a Sandy Hook person. So if there's a Sandy Hook person in the room, they kind of feel comforted by that. And the message is, we haven't forgotten you. Yes, it's 6 months later, 9 months later, you may be smiling or whatever, but I also know you're still hurting, because I am. And I know this just doesn't go away. And again, another recommendation I have is, ideally after these incidences, the peer support. And if you need other people, you'd have a buddy system, somebody who wasn't like severely impacted by Sandy Hook, who hooks up with somebody who was, and then they track them. And again, all my troopers and cops say, wow, if somebody just texts me once in a while and just said, how are you doing? Or what's going on? Or, hey, the anniversary's coming up, or hey, it's this going on. Or did you see the thing in the news? There was news stuff, there's depositions, there's all the conspiracy theories. All that stuff was churning people up for years after Sandy Hook. And so if that was recognized and they were checked in even once a month, a 2-minute phone call goes very far, which is, I'm thinking of you. This is bugging me. Is it bugging you? Is sort of the thing. And it does a lot of healing and is very helpful. And the command needs to ideally recognize the ongoing things in the news and everything, and would send out emails or something saying, hey, this has happened and might be stirring people up a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things that's encouraging now is that one of the partnerships we have through the memorial is with Destination Zero. And we see annually coming in applications where departments are submitting programs that they've instituted within their own respective departments concerning officer wellness. And they're submitting that for really for recognition of the work that's being done within those departments. And you're seeing it come in throughout the country. So the work it's spreading, whereas 10, 15 years ago, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. This never would have even happened. And things have changed. And you're recognizing it now throughout the country and the states. And Matt, you had mentioned going down to Georgia for the post-critical incident seminar down there, and where it brings in officers who have been through a critical incident, and it pairs them up with others who have been down there. So I think at the time that we were down there were additional officers down there from, Will was down there with Newtown. We also had representatives from Columbine, which was really what started putting school shootings onto the map, if you will. And then we also had Virginia Tech. We had a couple of detectives from Virginia Tech shooting down there. So you were able to meet with and talk to and share information with others. So there are these things that are in place, and they're becoming more, they're implemented more throughout our nation than they were years ago. And it's a benefit. It's also recognizing that there is a shift in police culture that's coming about. So it's good to see that you no longer have to take this and sort of live within a vacuum. You can actually share the information. There's a platform. There's a way in which you could share it. And then there's people that want to hear it. There's people that know that they need to hear it, and that information gets out there.
And if for nothing else, if you think you don't need it, you might be helping the guy sitting next to you. Something that you might say, and I know this happened in one of our debriefings. Somebody mentioned something, and it was like the light bulb went off, and the guy next to me goes, "Really?" He goes, "I've been dealing with that since, and I thought I was the only one." Then all of a sudden, it kind of normalizes it, right? Like, you're not alone. You're not on that island, struggling by yourself. Someone else next to you is probably dealing with the exact same thing. And if we push the peer support and the wellness programs, and maybe even the mandatory debriefings, these are the successes that happen. That, like Troy said, I got to go to the mandatory debriefing, and then you're sitting there and somebody says something, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, like I didn't tell anybody, but I've been dealing with the same thing, and now maybe in the back room they're like, hey, how are you dealing with that? Like, and then all of a sudden the conversation started.
So when you don't feel alone with something traumatic, you do 10 times better.
Right.
And so let me tell you something interesting about that with debriefings. When I'm doing EMDR with people on the tough part about a scene, sometimes it's something factual. Something's really bugging them that they don't understand, or they're confused about why something happened. And I call it looping. They're obsessively looping on, why did that happen? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? And there was a real prime evidences from Sandy Hook. I won't give you the example because it's a little traumatic image. But when in the debriefing, somebody can mention a factual piece that completely shifts the person, like making them feel better. Like, oh, really? Like that happened, or that happened first, and that's why I saw that, or, oh, like that would already taken care of. And it can completely release significant anxiety in somebody. And so that's the other important part of debriefings. They're not just talking about, I think people think it's like like an emotion fest, and where they also do kind of a tactical thing of what happened, who came first, who came second, and whatever. And that kind of understanding of what happened before you got there, or during and after, is also very settling. And like you said, and you may offer something, whether it's about something bothering you or just a factual thing, that's going to completely help change it for somebody next to you or across the thing. And like you said, so it's not just for you.
Yeah. And I think, going to what you said, some of it's insane how the trauma, and I don't know if you experience this, Will, or not, but like you're in a group of people and they're telling you you were here or doing this, and then you're not really quite sure. So then it kind of becomes your reality. But then later down the road, somebody says that they were actually doing that one thing. And now you're like kind of
confused,
really confused.
Right.
And I don't know that there's ever a real answer to it. And what I'm getting at, and I wrote this down earlier, is everyone's trauma is different. Everyone responds to the trauma differently. Everybody's,
everyone's brain is different. So everyone
Right.
who walked in that school had a different experience.
And behind that, like everybody's story is different. And just understand that. Don't get caught in the minutia of, oh no, Will, you were there at 9:06 and you were really there at 9:10. Like, who?
Doesn't matter.
I think that becomes traumatic, that people hold on to those angers and because they can't answer questions, or, their story isn't blending with what Will's telling me. And then it becomes, it's frustrating. And I think just accepting that you may not ever know the exacts of it. Don't get offended when somebody blends their story to your story.
Yeah, but what you're also naming is when you're in a highly focused brain state, you get tunnel vision and you block out things happening around you. So your memory isn't exact and it becomes fragmented the more stressed your brain gets. And so also recognizing no one's memory is perfect after a traumatic event. And unless it's a court of law or a police report, it doesn't matter. And everyone's got to have a different perception. You have a different brain coming in, different experiences, and your perceptions of the scene and the event are going to be different. And that's normal. And like what you're saying is don't compete or don't get spun up about that. Just accept the fact that whatever they're saying, and just stick to your truth and whatever, and realize no one's ever going to really know exactly what happened perfectly.
Right.
Yeah, we've got the pastor here. Think of a debrief as like a youth group mixer, right? Everybody's coming into the room. Imagine you took a puzzle and handed out pieces to everybody. And now everybody comes into a room and looks at their piece and talks about their piece. And all of a sudden, somebody across the room says, hey, you have the corner to finish this edge that I'm working on over here. And together we can put that puzzle back together. And there might be a handful of people who didn't show up to the room with their piece. But if the majority are there, you get a clear picture of it rather than just everybody sitting there frustrated by this portion of something that they can't quite figure out what they're looking at.
So I love that analogy, but we're also saying, and cops can be pretty stubborn, and that's, I think, what Matt's saying is, if someone puts down their piece here in the middle, and you thought your piece fit there too, is realizing maybe they're both there. Be creative. Okay, this isn't a true jigsaw puzzle. Maybe two pieces could be in the same place.
I didn't know we were going to talk about youth groups, but another similar thing I do is just, we're sitting around this table here, and we all see something different. We have our own unique perspective. And, I see a phone booth. I see an item on top of the phone booth. And that's my reality. But Matt, across the table from me, sees something very different. So it's not that my reality is the only reality. Yes, this is true, but also your reality. And those are all true. And to kind of let go of the fact that my reality is it and everybody else is wrong is the healthy thing to do.
If I could shift gears a little bit, one thing I wanted to get in here.
You don't want to talk about the youth group?
No, I'm done with youth groups.
Great, though. That was great. That's a great analogy.
So I just wanted to put this in there because I think you guys did a tremendous job at it, was remembering our families and not forgetting about them. Because, from a personal standpoint, my wife was as or more traumatized by it than I was. And for several different reasons. On my way that morning, while fumbling around with my phone, doing 100 and whatever the Crown Vic would do at that point, trying to call my wife. I was making that phone call that we all talk about, but, never want to. And it was the only time in my career that I made that phone call was, I don't know if I'm coming home today. So I wanted to make that phone call. So I get a hold of her and I said, it's bad. And I love you, that kind of phone call. And I hang up with her. And at the time she was working at a school district next door. And they shortly go into lockdown. And then of course the news is on and she's hearing all these things and I'm in the school. So a matter of time goes by before she hears from me. And that was very traumatic to her. But you guys not forgetting that offered the debriefings for the families, for our families. And she actually went through EMDR and it was tremendous. So I just wanted to make mention of that. If there's a department out there, making a checklist of how do we set this up and let's be ready for the inevitable. And hopefully the inevitable never happens, but don't forget the families, the wives, the girlfriends, the kids even. My kids, again, they were 6 and 7 and 3, too young to really know what was going on, but old enough to know something had happened. And then as they got older, they're seeing the images rerun on TV or they're, Googling my name and they're like, oh, Dad, you're on, there's you. Like, yeah, okay, you can shut that off. But just want to make mention of the families. Don't forget the families.
And I think about what are those, there were things that happened along the way. Because the whole experience is somewhat a blur, right? I mean, it was nonstop for weeks we were engaged. And it didn't even end at weeks. Because for me in my role, I was still involved in things with the families afterward and following up with people doing different things and individual things and getting some of our individual troopers to certain treatment facilities, whether it was substance abuse treatment or psychological treatment. So many things that, that I was in. And I thought, at least when I retire from the state police, I can sort of divorce myself to some extent from this. And it wasn't the case because then I went to work at the Connecticut State Police Union as a litigation and legislative liaison. and helping and representing some of our troopers who had sort of gotten themselves in a quandary, who were Sandy Hook people, and that kept coming up. And then I went back to the agency over a period of time as the director of Trooper Wellness and Resilience. And again, this was something that we were dealing with. And it's funny now, 10 years later, I look back and I just realized that it's here. It's going to be with us forever. We could be here in 20 years or 50 years, and we'll still be able to talk about this. And I think that's part of the takeaway. As many difficult things that came from that, as many challenges as I felt personally and professionally, it was because of you folks. It was because of all of you and everybody on our team, and the support of the community, the Newtown community. God bless those people. I mean, they're just magnificent people, and to be able to help them restore any degree of balance and comfort in their world, and I think that our presence did that. I know that there were a lot of engagement opportunities between our folks and Newtown folks and the communities as a whole, and other first responders. I don't want to minimize the efforts of anybody, but that's my real takeaway. My real takeaway is I say we're in this together. We're going to be in this together forever. This is it.
Yeah,
right?
It's never going away. And to add to that is, and it was brought up down at the SISM down in Georgia, and I fought it for the longest time after he said it, but I've come to terms with it at this point, and it's helped. We're not the same people we were the day before this, and we never will be, and it's okay. And we will forever hold on to this. I mean, I look forward to, a yearly conversation with Troy, or a little, hey, how you doing? Whatever it is. And I think you hit it on the nail. Nail on the head is anybody that had the intimate knowledge or that we had, we're always connected. And 50 years from now, we could see each other, and it's just that kind of head nod. Good, but there will always be that connection. And but just understanding that we're not who we were the day before, and that's okay. And we'll move forward, get the help that we need. There's times where I'm still triggered, and I have to, as long as I recognize what triggered me and what is going on, then I can get through it. If I can't, then I need to go seek alternate help in a positive way, not in a drinking way.
So it's called traumatic bonding, and it's the silver lining of trauma. And it happens, as Paul knows, even when people die and it's not traumatic, is, go to funerals and rituals, but trauma brings people very close together intimately because you share something horrific. And even if you never talk about it, you both know it. And that's the silver lining. When I see any of my, quote, Sandy Hook folks, people I've treated, people I was just knew through, like you at the table, I immediately, there's a big hug and a knowing. We don't have to say anything. It's like we have this connection that will be there forever. And there's something beautiful, absolutely spiritual and beautiful. And I'm going to say godly, and I'm not talking religion, I'm talking spirituality. It's just, there's something godly in that. And where you take that away is, I haven't seen one person, and I do pure acute trauma work now for 10 years. I haven't seen anyone with horrible traumas. They say, I don't wish this trauma happened, but what came of it and some of the positives, I don't think I would want to let that go either. Because if you do it right and you reach out and you don't kind of, go off sideways, there's such amazing connections and goodness and positive experiences that come from it that are like life-changing. And it's the new normal.
Yeah, I've been, besides the couple of days we spent in Georgia, I've been face to face with Matt, 4 times in my life, and we have a stronger bond, I would say, than a lot of people that I see on a daily basis.
Yeah.
It's absolutely
it's just
true.
there. It's deep,
Yeah.
The Georgia trip was significant. And Matt, I remember being down there, and you and I got to spend some time together, and I was with there was, I believe, 5 of us total, 6 from our group down there. We met up with a few others down there. But I remember thinking to myself, watching your buy-in, watching your acceptance of the information, I remember thinking, he's going to be okay. right? It's not going to be without its scars, but
Sure.
it's going to be okay. And then Will, and we've talked about this before, and I kind of want to, as we wrap up, I think it's important to mention this because it ties into with stuff that you were saying. And I've shared this with you before. I'm going to share it with the whole group here too. We were all out to dinner one night, and Connecticut State Police was over at this side of the restaurant. Newtown was over at this side of the restaurant, and Will came over to the table, and he sat down with you guys. And I understand that you work in the same geographical area, so that there was already you knew each other.
Put me in any room, I'll find somebody to buy me a beer.
But Will, it made such a lasting impression on me, and I remember thinking that you were an officer at the time. You were young. I don't think you had a lot of time on with Newtown at that time, but you did. I remember thinking to myself, there's a leader right there. You came over and you sat down with everybody, and to that, here we are 10 years later, and you were names that jumped as Troy and I were talking about putting this together and what this would look like. We were looking at, who are some of the people that we knew from back then that we've either stayed in touch with, but that could really speak to the need for peer support and how it's impacted them going forward that are doing well. Right. So 10 years later, where do you guys see yourselves?
Whew, that's a tough question, Matt. No, it's, I'm good. My family's good. Again, I'm not going to lie and say there's not triggers. There's some moments of anxiety. But again, given the tools that I've been given and as long as I can identify at least what I'm feeling and just let my emotions run through that feeling, and then it's over, and then I move on. I think, when Troy says we're bonded for life, it kind of sucks, in all honesty, but I'm also proud of it, proud of what we did that day, and proud of what we've done from a peer support as much. It's a tough, and I don't know if, you guys struggled with it. You heard, that first responder, the hero word. It's nothing I ever wanted to be a part of as far as that verbiage kind of thing, but we are. And again, there's struggles with it, but get yourself, be open to the help, be open to the comfort of another shoulder. And maybe it doesn't sound like I'm doing good, but I really am doing good. I mean, 10 years later, it's nothing. I can't even imagine where I would be if I wasn't open to the help. And in all honesty, I give the shout out to my wife. Like, she was the one that was like, you need to go talk to somebody. You need, like, and I was going through the steps, but it took her to be like, you need that extra, that EMDR, and going down to Georgia to the CISM seminar, and then just seeking out some clinical work on my own. It was, God, I don't know where I'd be, Troy and Matt. Like, it's scary. We're
glad you're here.
Yeah, so am I.
And Matt, what you're saying, it creates a wound. A traumatic incident like this creates a wound, and you have the courage to help heal the wound. It scabs over, it scars over, and it's always there.
Oh yeah.
And it can be poked a little bit, or it can be opened up. And what you said so clearly is, if it's just accepted, is okay, so I have this wound, just as if I have a little bit of a bum knee and I can tweak it any day, running or even just like bending down. And you recognize it, you feel the feelings. You're not going to sit in the feelings forever.
Right.
And you recognize and go, oh, this is kind of Sandy Hook related, or it's reminding me of something. I'm feeling a little sad. I'm having this image. And then you go through it and your life goes on and it's okay.
Right.
Yeah. So I can only just echo a lot of what you said. It's 10 years. It's I think a couple of key takeaways for me have been the consistency and the fact that it's something that has to be paid attention to. We're never the struggles we've had with it. We're never all the way better from. There's no beating that, and I don't say that from like a defeatist way. I just mean it's a constant. Think of it as somebody chasing. A Buddhist chasing the nirvana. You're never there. The idea is the process and getting there. So the healing process is the important part. And as long as you continue in the process, you're successful. The other thing, not to bring too much levity to your point about like the hero and talk about that, I like to compare it to, and I hope this doesn't get the Memorial in trouble with rights and stuff like that. But there's a movie by a big mouse company. We'll call it that way. So there's a character in the movie. So they can sue me if they want. I don't have much. If you ever see Moana, you got young kids, right? So I like to think of it this way, and I've found a lot of my growth has been through this vein. So Maui, right? He's this hero. He's this demigod. And I like to think of Moana as the perfect like rookie cop movie, right? Like he's ripped, he's covered in tattoos, and he thinks he's God's gift to the world. And he goes out and you're welcome for my service, right? If you watch the movie, not to romanticize it too much, but he never really becomes a hero until he takes all of his gifts and abilities and invests them fully into watching this young girl reach her potential as a hero. And I think that's been my takeaway over the last 10 years is, this sucked. It sucks that this is a part of my life, but there's growth that's happened because of it. There's a lot that I've learned about myself and about the world. And so my job now is to invest that into others and invest into young people and do anything that I've grown or gotten from this that's helped me, take that and just fully invest it into passing it on to whether it's kids through the schools or whether it's younger officers or whether it's going up to a town where they had officers killed in the line of duty, and just being there, just standing at the back of the room and being able to offer little bits of advice like, hey, think about throwing all the food away once a day because there's going to be new food coming in and somebody's going to get sick. Hey, think about, I noticed that guy said he's got a couple of kids at home. Think about asking him about how his kids are doing because he's probably a little different with all this going on. And his kids are probably hearing in the community what happened and, worrying that could happen to their parents. So, and just very quietly and humbly kind of offering out little bits of advice here and there. And it's been 10 years of trying to take anything I've learned and pass it on. And I think that's been what's helped me.
And again, the gift is being you. Yep. What you're really saying is, no, seriously, you in the back of the room, being you, meaning this wound has given you a gift that you can now help others. Because you standing in the back of the room, it helps vet you as a fellow cop, but it's more the Sandy Hook and the knowing of I've been wounded too. I've been there too. And that is an incredible gift because now the person trusts you and goes, oh, he'll understand. He will really understand. And I'm not alone in this. So again, Matt had trouble accepting the compliment, but I'm saying it's not a compliment, just a fact. Your wound is now a gift if you use it as a gift. You can keep it as a wound and be bitter and whatever. And some people did that, or you can take wounds and transform them into gifts to help and give back to others. And it's a very powerful gift when you do that. And it's wonderful that you both can do that and have the courage to do that.
Yeah, I just, for my closing statement, Your Honor. First of all, I just want to say I'm humbled to even be sitting at this table, sitting between these two men and Troy and Matt. We've had a connection before, Sandy Hook. But what just struck me when you said the word wounded, one of the people that has influenced the way I think about what I do now as a pastor was Henry Nouwen, who wrote a well-known book called Wounded Healer. And where he was a priest, he taught at Yale. He spent most of his life working with people with developmental disabilities. What we talked about was wounds or trauma, as painful as they are, they can also be a gift and enable us to bring healing to others. It's and so that's how I understand my work, as a pastor and as a chaplain. Certainly, one is not a perfect person. I have my own wounds. And finally, one of the good things that came out of this terrible event for me was understanding the appreciation of the bonds that we have now. And again, how trauma can bring people together. My Christmases are different now, but I have, I think, a renewed appreciation for life and the gifts, and still worry about sending my kids and my wife off to school in the morning. But certainly a different person, but a stronger person, and deeply appreciative of everyone here.
Thank you. Appreciate your and all the help that you gave us.
Yeah, and continue to. It's one of the things is we're talking about this, and as I look at the work that Matt and I are involved with every day at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial down in Washington, D.C., and we're in the officer safety and wellness business. That's what we're involved in, and it's exciting to see that agencies across the country are getting this. They're becoming more enlightened. They're recognizing that taking care of their personnel is, this is a benefit. This is a benefit as much as health insurance, as much as free uniform dry cleaning. This is a benefit. It is part of your retirement, because if you can come into this agency well, or any other agency, and you can make it through your career and come out doing pretty well too, that's part of retirement. And I look at that, and I think it's refreshing. I think it's exciting. Matt had mentioned earlier about Destination Zero, a flagship program in our officer safety and wellness programs. And it's really agencies taking credit for the great work that they're doing. And many of those agencies are doing things even far beyond what we did in the Connecticut State Police, which is even more reassuring to know that there are people that are really advancing and pioneering an industry that, quite frankly, I think is limitless. I think there's so much more that can be done. The fact that we got it early on, to the extent that we did, was helpful. The fact that we recognize that chaplaincy and spirituality is a significant piece, especially as we look back at some of the debriefings, Reverend, that we've done over the years, and not just Sandy Hook, but suicides and sort of line of duty deaths, all these sorts of things. The importance of having the brain science, the importance of connecting with the folks that were there, and then eventually marshaling that relationship to a point where you want to be a part of the helper.
Right.
Like, that to me is amazing. Like, I was there, I was receiving the help, and I want to help give it. And I think that there's lessons to be learned from everything here. But, the one thing that you've talked about, all of you, is about that feeling of being alone, or being alone in the moment, or dealing with your thoughts and experiences alone. No officer in this country is ever alone. You're never alone, even if you don't have an organized peer support program. Peer support has been here since police work has been here. Paul, when you started young, I'm sure when you were on horseback, you would pull up to,
my pre-motorcycle days.
You'd pull up to your other horse-mounted friend, and you would talk, and that's what we would do. Except the difference is, and the reason why peer support is so important, is we add different elements, policies, procedures, training. Right, a training piece is big. Right, there's a vetting process. We look for the best of the best. We continue within service training. We form this like when you look at a tactical team. You want them to have the best practices, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing it around the country. So if you're listening in some far-reaching corner in a small rural area, you're not alone. Go on nleomf.org. Look at the programs that we have. Call me. Send me an email. We can connect you. We have amazing programs that we've been able to sort of recognize and showcase from around the country. Let us point you in their direction. We can make those connections. That's what we're here for.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Lifeline, where we revisited the police peer support response to Sandy Hook. Check out our other episodes of Lifeline and even more content by Precinct 444, wherever you find your podcasts. Thank you to our guests, Will Chapman, Matt Bell, Robin Grant Hall, and Paul Krampitz. To Jimmy Guerrero for opening up his home and studio here at Highly Unoffended. And as always, thanks to Christopher Mitchell, the museum's manager of digital content and strategy, for producing. And many thanks to you for listening to this episode of Lifeline and Precinct 444 podcast from the National Law Enforcement Museum. We hope you'll join us again.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.